And so I hired for the cruise ships, small cruise ships, and the expeditions. And so I was able to, I really felt like I was touching them with a magic wand and saying, here's your opportunity to go do an experience and live on on a boat. And we were chartered by Smithsonian, World Wildlife Fund, National Geographic. So they were all natural history trips. And I'd say, come work on a ship for 6 months, save your money, and off they did. So I did the human resources, and I hired and managed and did that administration. And then after 5.5 years, I just said, that's it. I need to get away. And I took an art class.
Hey, Islanders, and welcome to episode 184 of the Camino Voice. Today I speak with the featured Artist of the Month for August of 2023. Please welcome Barbara Noonan. Hi, I'm Brandon Erickson, and you're listening to the Camino Voice podcast, where I interview local business owners, comedians, singers, and more. I dive into their backstory to find out how they got where they are, what are some of the tips for you to do the same, and find out where they are going. Tune in every week as I interview more of the people you see every day. Hey, Islanders, and welcome to another episode of the Camino Voice, where we release a new episode sometimes on Tuesday. I can only say that because we are coming back off of a 2-week break, and we are returning with a featured Artist of the Month episode. But before we get into that, how was your guys' week? How have things been going for you? I hope you guys had a great 4th of July, because I think I was gone over that time. Yes, I was. And I just wanted to give you guys a quick update. So I've recently brought on a VA, which is a virtual assistant, which for anyone who doesn't know who that is, I mean, I think it's self-explanatory with that name. But yeah, just basically someone that is virtually there to kind of work as an executive assistant. The benefits of hiring one through a company is usually that you don't have to, if you don't know how much workload there is there, you don't have to bring them on full-time right away. Whereas if you hire someone that's an executive assistant, typically they need full-time or a certain amount of hours a week. And because I don't know where I'm at on that, I wanted to go with this service and try that. So if anyone's interested, I'm currently using Belay, and they have a really good program where they help onboard you. You've got a handler on top of the VA or alongside the VA. So if you have questions, if you have, like, can a VA do this, or what are some of the best ways to utilize a virtual assistant, you can do that. So anyways, I went through their service, and so far it's been a really good experience. And so at some point I may actually have her on the podcast just to get a perspective of what's it like to be a VA and kind of that, in case anyone's interested in that as well. But the reason I'm bringing all of this up is because I have handed off the scheduling of podcasts to her. So she's been reaching out to a ton of people to get me lined up, so I don't run into I forgot to schedule someone this week, which is what typically happens. So hopefully the podcast will be more consistent. Will be coming out on a weekly basis, just like we've had it. And so I just wanted to give you a quick update on that, because that way you guys were aware of where I am and what's going on. So anyways, I'm excited to be back in the seat. I've got this podcast, and I have another one that I've interviewed, and like I said, we have a ton more coming down the pipeline. So we're looking good for the future. The future of the podcast looks good for now. I also want to be I want to look at updating my what is it? The logo, sort of, but kind of want to add in maybe a different profile picture and stuff like that. So I'm working on stuff. That'll hopefully be coming down the pipeline as well. So anyways, like I said, again, I'm back in it. So please be sure to share, subscribe, do all the things with this podcast that you can. And if you want to talk about, this is now like, 2-3 weeks ago. But I did actually have Kyle Bingham, who is or at least was a team member of the Ocean Gate. And so he talked about their first voyage down to the Titanic and all of the stuff that went on there. And so obviously that has been in the news, Ocean Gate and all the stuff going on. But anyways, if you want to catch up on a little bit of that, just a history of that before anything happened, anything bad happened, you can be sure to check out that podcast. And I don't remember the episode number, but I will have that linked in the show notes below. So, all right, this podcast, I get to speak with Barbara Noonan. And one thing I love about interviewing people is that people are fascinating and they have so many other facets to them than the thing that you're diving into. So I went into this podcast thinking, okay, here we go. We're going into Artist of the Month. We're going to talk about art styles and, techniques and things like that. And we get into her history, and she had a long history in the tourism field industry. There we go. And so it was really interesting hearing about that. We talked about her working in a remote island in Alaska. She did some cruise ship tours, including one that was around Tahiti, which, if you remember, I went to the beginning of this year. So that was kind of fun. Tahiti's not a place that most people just go. So that was fun. And but then she also moved from that into an human resources director role, where she was doing the hiring for multiple different cruise ships. And she said, she really learned how to hone her ability to ask good questions during the interview, because when you're hiring for someone for a cruise ship, you're not just hiring someone that is going to be someone that you're going to work with and then you go home and clock out. You guys are basically roommates. She says it as siblings, and then your coworker. So you're like three different things. And so you have to live with each other. Like, you can't, if you have a frustrating day with that person, you don't go home and rant about it to your spouse. You are right there with them. Like, they're who you're hanging out with after hours. So, I thought that was fascinating. We get into a few of her questions, and I really would like to have her back on the podcast where we focus more on that human resource side, because that side is always fascinating to me. And then we did get into the art side, and the way she does art is also very unique. So we're going to get into all of that and more into this episode. So I think you're going to learn a lot more out of this episode than you think. So anyways, without further ado, here's my conversation with Barbara Noonan. Hey, Islanders, and welcome to another episode of the Camino Voice. Today I'm here with the featured Artist of the Month for August 2023. Welcome to the podcast, Barbara Noonan.
Hi, it's nice to be here. Thank you, Brandon.
Awesome. Did I pronounce the last name right?
Noonan, that's
Noonan.
correct.
Okay, whew, got it.
In fact, it ties in well with my website title, Mornin', Noonan, Night.
Now it makes sense.
Thanks.
Very cool. Well, before we get started, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I am originally from Massachusetts, but moved out to the Northwest in '82 and had no interest in art until I turned about 40 years old, and then started taking art classes, and was fortunate enough to go find the correct teachers and the right inspiration, and I did really well. But I am originally from Massachusetts, as I said, and I had a degree in medical technology. So
Okay.
I did hospitals and open heart surgeries at Providence and Ballard and Seattle, and left that to go into tourism. So I have a completely atypical history, I would say. So the degree was in science. Then I drove tour buses in an Eskimo village in Alaska called Kotzebue, Alaska.
Okay.
And did natural history tours out on an island in the Bering Sea called St. Paul Island.
Okay.
So I did bird watching and hiking and trips. And then I worked on ships, in small expedition ships in Tahiti and the Caribbean and up
Really?
and down the East Coast.
Okay.
And so what happened is I took photos. I was exposed to scenery a lot, and I became an avid photographer right off the bat.
Yep.
And those photos add to my art and allow me to just continue to make my art richer, and the compositions and the subject matters and everything. So
Awesome. Very cool. All right. Well, I actually, earlier this year, my family and I, we actually did a trip to Tahiti.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
Who'd you go with? Do you know?
And we ended up just going, there was one of those flight deals.
Yeah.
And we try and get away somewhere warm in January. My wife, the seasonal depression stuff and all that. And so she was we were looking for a spot, and we were looking in these other areas, and they were pretty expensive. And then that deal came up, and Brittany's like, "What about Tahiti?" And I'm like, "Never thought about that, but sure."
And what was your experience like?
It was really neat. We stayed. It was 9 days. We were actually on islands.
Outstanding.
The first half was on Moorea.
Yes.
Right outside, and so that was really cool because it's that little bit more rural, and we just hung out at the beach. We were on a beach house there, and then the second half of the trip was in Tahiti, in the main city there, and we were just hanging out there, it was really fun. Weather was great. Fish was amazing. I mean, you got to see the people ride up with the bikes and sell the fish to the vendors, and the vendors would then pay them, and then they would cut the fish and clean it and serve it. So
it sounds fantastic. And I was there 7 months the first time and a couple of months different other times, also in the winter.
Mm-hmm.
And what was really great was you knew it was Tuesday, it was Bora Bora Day, and that was, it was a great life. We lived on a ship, and it went from island to island to island, and the passengers came from all over and joined us every Sunday. And like you said, the fish, the French baguettes, the French cheese, and the pineapple, and all the fresh fruit. Yeah,
Yes.
it's wonderful. Yeah, and the blue water, which also feeds into my work sometimes because of that blue color, that turquoise. I'm always seeking that turquoise blue.
Yeah.
So,
Very cool.
Oh, I'm glad you got to go.
Yeah, it was somewhere I'd never thought about before, and definitely a really neat experience, neat area to be in. And
Time to go to Alaska next.
yes. All right, perfect. So, growing up in Massachusetts, then, what kind of led you to medical?
This isn't very precise, but I fell in love with someone, and I was sure I wanted to get married, and so I wanted to get the quickest degree I could. Well, that didn't work out, and I ended up going into laboratory science. It's interesting because I always liked science, but then to be able to look through a microscope and also work with patients, because I do have a people caregiving aspect of my life all the time. But looking in the microscope, I was able to see the cells. I liked the detail, the biology, the microbiology. And so that's how I started into that. And then it's ironic, I only did it for a few years and then went right into tourism.
Okay. How did that kind of transition, how did that come about?
Well, at the time, the hospitals were starting to phase out employees, and they had something called, well, anyway, it doesn't matter what it's called. But I decided that I would take a leave of absence. And a friend of mine who was from Massachusetts had moved out to Seattle and had said to me, "Hey, I'm going to go drive tour buses up in Alaska. Do you want to join me this year?" And I went, "Oh yeah, I'll take a 3-month leave of absence." So I took a leave of absence, and there was no job when I went back. And I loved it. I mean, people who are on vacation are happy. People in hospitals are not so happy.
No,
So
yeah.
I got a chance to hike over the tundra and drive a tour bus, and mind you, old 59 Fords and 60 tour buses over into the rubble. And anyway, it was wonderful. And then that company also had ships, and so I worked in. I asked if I could go on the Tahiti run, and they did. They put me as an expedition cruise director.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah.
And you mentioned in Alaska, you said you did one of the islands you did was a bird watch. You did like a.
Yes.
Is that the main? I don't know if there's a main one in Alaska, but there's one I've heard about, and I don't remember its name. But that, like every year, it has a lot of birds that are hard to find elsewhere.
Yes. Very well done. Yeah. Ironically, it's called St. Paul Island, and the adjacent island is St. George Island.
Okay.
We're going to jump ahead, but I'm going to also tell you that we live in St. George Island, Florida in the winter, so there's the small story. But St. Paul Island is in the middle of the Bering Sea.
Okay.
It's about 650 residents. I was the other blonde with glasses. There was Phyllis and me, and the rest of them were natives and a few Caucasian people that were there doing research through the National Marine Fisheries. But people would go out on these tours, and spend 3, 4, 5 days at a time and bird watching to see whatever had flown over from Russia and blown into the island. So they were rare birds they could add to their North America list.
Yeah.
And also, we looked at seals, fur seals that were in harems there. And I did botany, and I'd hike until 11 o'clock or midnight at night because it was still light out and I could. It was the best experience ever.
That's
absolutely
crazy.
Wonderful. And so we gave tours, and it was like my favorite job. I got to work 1/3 of the time, I got to research 1/3 of the time, and I got to hike 1/3 of the time, and I was in heaven.
Nice. How was that for you being like very secluded in a fairly, I mean, not fairly, very rural, like wilderness kind of area? How was that for you?
Well, because I knew I was going to be there just for the summers, I think I handled it a lot better than
Okay.
if it was year-round.
Yes.
And I had the freedom of being in a vehicle that I could take over the country and around the island. A lot of islanders, believe it or not, would stay in town and wouldn't even go to the other side of the island except for once or twice a year.
Okay.
I don't think, maybe that's true here on Camino. I don't know. I bet there's some people that don't get to every corner of the island every year.
Yes.
But I loved it. I fell into a world that I think because the island had a periphery and I had to learn the information for just this island, I felt like it was a container and wealth of information that I could dive into and really learn about well and teach about it. And so it worked out well for me being there.
That's awesome.
And mind you, the island, when you flew in onto a runway that they had to make sure the reindeer weren't on the the runway. And then the bus that we drove was the departure lounge and the receiving lounge because there was no building at the airport.
Yeah.
And the weather was so bad that you never knew whether you were going to get a flight in or not.
Yeah.
So anyway, it pushed people into an environment immediately. They'd come in from New York and they'd land here and they were worried about their luggage. And it's like, no, you got to go see nature. It was fantastic.
Nice. Very cool. Yeah, we've, was it last year, maybe the year before, I went with two of my friends to Kodiak, Alaska.
Oh, fantastic.
His mom grew up on Kodiak, actually.
Wow.
And so their family has a cabin out there. But yeah, we flew in, and that's what he was telling me before we went there. He's like, sometimes it does take a couple, like sometimes you don't get in the first day because, yeah, if the weather's not good, then you turn around. And so actually we both got in just fine because we were in together. The next day when we were supposed to pick up our friend, his flight got delayed by a day because we were watching him fly in circles. We're like, just come down. And then they took off and had to do it the next day. So, you can't control nature.
Which is good because when we're out of control, we're going to learn something new. And
Yeah.
I think it's a great experience.
Yeah. I think that's something as I've gotten older, in lots of circumstances. Maybe it's because when you're young, everything's fast and you have to get there and you have to do these things. But I feel like if anything happens, whether it's an emergency or just something out of the ordinary or whatever, I'm always at the point in my mind where I'm like, if something happens and it delays us by whatever, it's fine. Like, we'll figure it out. We can figure out the next step. We can do whatever.
Well, the bus would break down in the middle of the tour, and you're on the other side of the island, and you'd have to climb to the hill where you could find, and you had a handheld radio, a marine radio, and you'd call up and say, you'd call the mechanic, and everyone on the island was listening, and you would hear them go ha 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 hee hee hee, and and they'd have their own language, and they'd be like, she's stuck again, and I'd be like, yeah, could you just send them over to pick me up because the passengers are just waiting, so yeah. But it made for a good story for them because when they were inconvenienced and they had a story they could tell, oh yeah, and our bus got stuck in the sand, blah blah blah.
Yeah, very cool.
Life is all about rolling with the punches.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then you started doing the tourism with Tahiti in that area. What kind of led you back to, either here or you mentioned Florida. What did you do? How did you get out of the tourism group and then kind of
Well,
move on from there?
I was fortunate enough to go into the human resources aspect of the tourism industry.
Mm-hmm.
And so I hired for the cruise ships, small cruise ships, and the expeditions. And so I was able to, I really felt like I was touching them with a magic wand and saying, here's your opportunity to go do an experience and live on a boat. And we were chartered by Smithsonian, World Wildlife Fund, National Geographic. So they were all natural history trips. And
Okay.
I'd say, come work on a ship for 6 months, save your money. And off they did. So I did the human resources, and I hired and managed and did that administration. And then after 5.5 years, I just said, that's it. I need to get away. And I took an art class.
Okay.
And that's how I took an art class. I was in Seattle by this time.
Okay.
And so I took an art class, and it was like, wow, maybe I have some talent here. And that's how I started into the art.
Awesome. So what was that first art class then?
The first art class was drawing on the right side of the brain.
Okay.
It's a common class that they tell people, if you think you can only draw stick figures, try this book.
That's what I do.
Yeah, well, you know what? I didn't think I could draw either. I mean, I was a photographer, but I picked up a sketchbook and I started sketching. And then this class, I took it as a class. It puts you through exercises that makes you realize things are shapes. You don't have to draw exactly. Anyway, it shifts your mindset from that left side of your brain, which is more numbers and words, to the right side of your brain where you lose yourself. You know how sometimes you're doing something and you lose track of time?
Mm-hmm.
That's what art is.
Okay.
It's shifting to the right side of the brain and letting that creativity flow.
Yeah.
And so I learned how to do that, and that was my first class, and it was like, okay, and then I just kept taking more classes and more classes as they presented. And I highly recommend it for other people too.
Nice. Very
And-
cool. So then, as you were getting into art, I'm assuming that class, you dove into a lot of different mediums in that class. Is that true?
Actually, ironically, the class that I found myself gravitating towards portraits.
Mm-hmm.
I think it had to do with all of the people I saw in Tahiti, Alaska, the Caribbean.
Yeah.
And I did a lot of photography of faces, and then I did human resources, so I was interested in their stories and the interviews and everything like that. So I went and took a portrait painting class, and it was mostly just sketching, and I was trash. I was terrible at it, and I kept it up. And then somebody in one of my classes said, you know, you're pretty much a natural with pastel. You should try that. And I thought, oh, okay. But I've tried gouache, which is an opaque watercolor,
Okay.
and I learned how to mix color in those classes.
Yeah.
I've taken painting. I've painted in oils. I've painted in acrylic. I've worked with mixed media, where you're scraping and throwing almost anything at a piece of paper or a piece of surface. But I keep going back to pastels because it's immediate. It's dry. That you don't have to wait for it to dry.
Yeah.
And it's portable, and I can take it almost anywhere I go.
Okay.
And so and the papers are better too. So that's how I got into it. But I do love all other mediums, and especially photography. I still do that.
Nice. Very cool.
Do you do photography?
I don't. In fact, I struggle to just remember to take photos of, my kids and my family and stuff when we're on vacation or elsewhere. So,
Is there another person in your family that's the photographer?
no, the downside is that both my wife and I are both actually bad at that.
It's time to hand your children cameras or phones.
They each have their own little, things. Like, one of my daughters has a watch that can take photos, but it can hold, 30 photos.
Oh, yeah, never mind.
So she's constantly deleting them, and her, yes.
Yeah.
Well, we're still searching for that.
Okay.
But very cool. Well, so you touched on this, and we'll get back to the art in just a minute. But over that time period that you were doing human resources and you were hiring a lot of people, I would say, especially in this area, a lot of their businesses are retail or customer facing.
Yes.
And so you're looking for that like hospitality kind of side to it. What were things that stood out to you? I mean, that's a long time to be interviewing a lot of people constantly. What were things that stood out to you as things that you were like, these components seem to make a really good team member versus these ones are red flags where I would decide probably not?
Absolutely. I developed my own interview questions.
Okay.
And I will be honest, I had an excellent track record. I had to hire people to not only work on the ship, but live on the ship and stay on the ship. So they had to be an employee, they had to be a sibling almost,
Yeah.
and they had to be a roommate. And I said to them when I would talk to them, I said, I'm putting you with my friends, and I want to make sure you're a good match. Not you better get along, but you have to make sure you're a good match.
Yeah.
And so I had a lot of screening questions. And I spent longer than most anyone would spend in an interview, but I created a comfort that after an hour, they would spill their guts. And I'd be like, great, because now I get the background story. And it takes longer. I also checked references a lot.
Yes.
I was really good at being investigative on how to get, even if they said they not allowed to give out information, I was able to get them to reveal information, and I was very proud of my techniques. It wasn't illegal. It was very by the board, but
Yeah.
but yeah, getting to them to find out what works for teamwork, what works for bosses, what kind of bosses motivate them. I had a whole good series of questions. And then as far as roommates, I used to say that if I was ever going to interview for a roommate, I'd like to see what their car looks like, because how their car looks is
dear.
how they're going to maintain their living situation. So
Oh, very cool. What were the basis of your interview questions? Were they
I think he's trying to find professional business.
Okay.
No, are you trying to find questions for your staff? Just kidding. No.
Yeah, well, always. I'm always looking for different ways because I've adjusted my I have a printout
Yeah.
of interview questions that I always go through, and I'm always looking for other ones.
I got one
to
for
add
you.
more. Okay.
What makes a team work well?
Okay.
And in once they tell you what makes a team work well, and if you do hire them, you go back and you bring out the interview questions and you say, this is what you said makes a team work well. How does that work for you? How are you doing? Describe a perfect boss. What do you like in a boss? Do you want someone who's hands off? Do you want somebody who's more in your business? Do you want someone who's going to be coddling you a lot? You'll know.
Right.
What motivates you?
Yeah.
You know, are you motivated by wage? Are you listen to what motivates them.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see.
Well, and that one is really interesting because over the last, really starting kind of with millennials, when you listen to the people that are in that field still, there's a lot of complaining of like, well, they don't know how to work and they don't know how these basic things, like how to sweep a floor sometimes or these different things. But one of the benefits I think that the millennial and the generations past them we've been finding is they're not motivated by just money. Which
That's
on one
right.
hand,
Absolutely.
You're like, well, that was the easiest lever because it's a yes or a no.
Right.
But they're motivated by your mission. They're motivated by their beliefs. They're motivated by the team around them.
Their social aspects.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, I know. It's a different hiring world than I had.
Yeah.
When I was hiring them, it was back in the 90s. And I hired in both economies where it was limited in how many people I could find to do the job. I mean, mind you, I'm hiring people at that time to work for $25 a day plus tips.
Whew.
However, and they were working 12-hour days, 6 months was 1 day off a week. However, they got room and board for free, and free uniforms, and so they were able to suck their money away. the motivation is different for everyone, but once the team got together and also the environment and what they got to see and do and experience, that helped. I also did team building exercises and things like that, or management is always hard too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is definitely where I spent probably most of my time since taking over the business. Has really been focused on the people and that side, because that's what takes the most time. Some business owners have said, like, people are your highest highs and your lowest lows, and they really are. When you see someone hit that next level and succeed, there's not really a feeling like it.
Yep.
And when you have to let someone go because they're not performing or it's just not a good fit, also nothing like it.
Do you know what, though? Think of it as setting them free, because this isn't a good place for them. Set them free to go do something else somewhere else, because someone's going to have to, they're going to find something else.
Yeah.
Another thing is I really was proactive in evaluations. Some people say, we'll evaluate you at 6 months, or we'll evaluate it a year, and then they never get around to it. And we all want to be recognized.
Yeah.
And we all want to have time to tell our story and our version of it. I also did exit interviews.
Yes.
And that helped a lot, because it's what you do at the exit interview information too, but it helps. It makes you see from their perspective what's going on.
Right. No, I always try and do that, and especially if someone is quitting or leaving
Disgruntled.
for other. Yeah. Because that's where, you're like, you've got nothing left to lose. Just tell me everything you think.
But even the ones that are leaving for the right reasons, they're valuable too. They're going to tell you exactly what did work for them and what didn't. And it's helpful.
Yeah. Very cool. Well, thank you for jumping into that. I know we were focusing on the art, but
I was very proud of my human resources record, and but I get you. It's really hard. It's a challenging profession.
Yep. Awesome. So jumping back into the art then, when you started working with pastels, you've mentioned like why you like it as a medium. What was it that really, I guess, kind of meshed with you when you started painting with them?
One thing about soft pastels, you can mix the color, but especially when you're beginning, you mix the color. But nowadays, I can buy a series of colors so that I don't have to take the time to mix it. I know how to mix colors, and I think that's important for every artist to learn. But with pastel, it's you can grab a stick and then grab another stick and make a mark. You don't have to take the time to mix it onto the brush and then put it onto the surface. I remember feeling the textural part of it. I had a model that was bald, and as I was blending the pastel on the paper, I have my fingers on the paper while I'm talking to you.
Yeah.
But as I was blending the colors on to match the color of his scalp, I felt like I was almost touching him because with pastel, you try and make your marks the shape and the roundness of the form, and so I don't know, there's just something about it that...
Yeah, so it's textural as well as visual.
Oh yeah. And it's also, I work in mediums, it's a particular medium, but I work in papers that I can literally hose it off or take a scrub brush to it and wash it all off and start again, and it stains the paper, but I can go back and work on it again.
Okay.
And so I've chosen supplies that it can't be too dear. I can wash it off and start again.
Okay.
And pastel allows me to do that. Same as oil painting, you just scrape it off. But
yeah, nice, very cool. So, can you walk us through kind of your creative process?
Oh, in how many hours do you have? In general, right now, I'm working from photos. I worked from life for the most of my life. In my art career, in fact, it has informed me because I've been able to go out plein air painting for years and years, and seeing the light, the color, the texture. Like I'm looking over your shoulder right now at a tree behind you and staring at the shapes and lights and values and darks. And So my process is I take a photo and I manipulate the crap out of it in Photoshop elements.
Okay.
I don't want to paint the ordinary. I want to paint something a little extraordinary.
Yeah.
And I'm going to push the colors. I'm going to use filters. I'm going to turn it around. I'm going to flip it horizontally. I'm going to stretch it. I'm going to distort it. I'm going to just manipulate everything about it. And then I work in a square format now for the most part. So then I cut it and crop it into a square. And then I go into the sketching of it. The first thing I do is I sketch it out so that I know where my lights and darks are in a little thumbnail, just a small 2-inch by 2-inch square. And I'll do several versions of that, moving the horizon line up or down, or moving where the basic big shapes are in one area of the square. And then once I've got a small version of it that I like, and it's in 2 values typically, white and black, then I go on to paint it. And I choose the paper. Is it going to be a small size? Does it need a larger piece of paper? And then I do some underpainting, and then I go in with the pastel. I don't know whether this makes sense.
No, that sounds really neat. And I love that piece that I love how different artists have different processes in what they want to achieve with their art. And the fact you're talking about using the digital side of like recreating or manipulating what you want to make and then jumping to the painting. Whereas there's a lot of people that are like, they'll call themselves purists and they're like, well, I'll just paint from this, or they'll paint from that. Like, or there's abstract and there's different pieces, but I like how you're fusing kind of this abstract and realism together into one thing.
Yeah, it works for me. I attended a fabulous workshop that doesn't exist any longer, but it was annually held in Taos. And basically what they said was, if you can have somebody catch someone's eye for longer than 12 seconds on a painting, then you've done it. You can paint everything every day, and we're all used to seeing that. But if I can stop you in your tracks and make you look at it and go, is that a flat shape or a dimensional shape? Why is that cow purple? Or why is the ear blue? Or why does that reflection go down there when there's no lake? Or anyway, so I want you to question what's in the composition. A lot of the pieces that I have in the show that's coming up here don't have all of these elements. This is a different, we'll talk about that series, I imagine, a little bit. But I am the type of artist that when I go to critique sessions, the instructor would say to me, well, which personality are we working with today? Because one day it would be abstracts, another day it would be tight detail, another time it would be weird colors or black and white. So I am not somebody that I ever want to be pigeonholed into they are this type of art. And yet I am told people can say, oh, that's a Noonan. And they recognize it even though it's all different.
Very cool.
It is cool.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's very cool.
Yeah. So, so another thing that we mentioned earlier on is that you are both in the Pacific Northwest, but you're also in the southeast corner of the United States as well. How does the switching between those two places kind of affect your art?
I have studios in both locations. One's in my garage, one's in a back bedroom. I am so fortunate because I am in the panhandle of Florida, so it's not in around the main busy parts. We're in a very remote area. It's like the old Florida. It's called the Forgotten Coast.
Okay.
And the light is different. my palette is different.
Yeah.
Here we've got the rich dark greens. They've got pine trees, but they're not the deep, thick forests.
Yeah.
The skies are broodier here, although their skies are enormous there. That's something I've noticed is I see much more of the skies.
Right.
I try and slip in a mountain, and there is absolutely not a mountain to be found in all of Florida. It is flat, flat, flat. In fact, I'm going to take a workshop on learning how to paint the surf and the luminosity of the surf because I can't master that yet. But there's marshes there,
Yeah.
like we have here. There's the change in fall colors. The grasses in the marsh change.
Yeah.
But yeah, mostly I have to work lighter. I can work on a dark paper here in the Northwest. And when I go to Florida, I have to swap to a light paper.
Yeah.
And I pack a lot more turquoise.
Yes. Yeah. Well, and that was kind of also when you're painting in the two different locations. Do you feel like you have a different mood or like emotion or feeling when you're painting down there versus up here?
No, I guess the biggest thing that I've noticed down there right now is I have two painting groups that I paint with. I don't have painting groups up here yet, and maybe that'll come, and I'm looking forward to it. But right now I paint with a group of artists that work in all mediums on one day and another group that just work in pastel. And I always wanted silence in my studio. I was somebody that, when I went to the library, I studied in quiet. And then I learned when I was down there that I don't have to have that silence. I can now play with it a little bit more because I think I have a skill level that's a little higher.
Yeah.
So, does my mind change? Yeah. I don't know. You just get lost in your art.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, and we spent some time in Charleston, South Carolina.
Oh, fun. I've been there.
And it's, again, it's completely flat. It's funny how there's norms in each area that you live, and you just are unaware of those things. And so for us, when we were down there, the idea of a mountain is weird as that is with the internet and everything that exists. People, you just don't have the concept of a mountain. Like you can see a photo of a mountain, you're like, yeah, that's a mountain. But they don't have the concept of like what it feels like when you look up, and there's the mountain. Because it's just flat. And
That's right.
When we were talking with our people there, it was hysterical because there would be like a little hill somewhere, and people would drive for miles to see this hill.
That's
And
right.
they're like, it's a hill, it's a mountain. And I'm like, that's barely a hill.
No, they have to climb into the lighthouses to get any aerial perspective there. And they do. I mean, they have lighthouse climbs every month in the full moon, and everyone runs up to the top to see a view.
Yeah.
My brother lives in Sarasota, and he said, well, I haven't done stairs in a long time, or an elevator. We happen to be on a house that's like 12 feet up above because all the houses are built up high down there so that the water can go through in case of hurricanes and things. So.
Yeah.
But it's a different environment, and it's wonderful. We're by the water there as well, I don't know.
That's awesome.
The boats are the boats, and
Yep.
and it's just the trees are a little different.
Yeah, absolutely. Very cool. Is there an experience or maybe a piece of art that challenged you artistically, and after getting through that, you felt like you had really gone to the next level?
Every time, all the time. No, it's not every time. There are some that I can whip through, and I know. I admit it. I can say, oh, there's Mount Rainier. Brrr. I can paint Mount Rainier or Mount Baker. No, believe it or not, abstracts are the hardest thing to paint. Everyone says, oh, my kid could make that, and I dare them. It's hard, and it's challenging. I might change my palette, and I might do it in colors that are odd, or I might do it in size. I might say I'm going to go really large this time, and that's a challenge. Every year I do something called my accomplishment list, and I look at all of the things I've accomplished over the year. Yeah, we should talk about that more if you want to hear a little bit more
Yeah,
about
for sure.
because I've taught that workshop as well. But one of the things I do every year is I take at least 2 pieces that I have that have challenged me or I am most proud of, and I take photos of those and I put that on the cover of the accomplishment list. And then attached to that, I have my list of things that I've accomplished for the year.
Mm-hmm.
And then I include, and I write down what it is. Was it size? Was it a new subject matter? Was it something that I won an award for and I was so proud of? And that helped me a lot. So
Yeah. So where did you come up with the concept of the accomplishment list?
that's that human resources in the background. I would watch people get passed over for promotions, and or managers who would say to me, well, I want to go into another job. And I'd say, and I did it myself, and they wouldn't listen to me. So I said, here's what you need to do. For your review, you have to tell me what you've accomplished over the year, be it in your job or in your personal life, or how it affects your job. And so I would come up with, how many shows did I enter this year for my art? How many awards did I win? How many shows did I not get into? How many techniques did I try this year? How many magazines did I read for my education or studies or classes that I took? What did you sell? What didn't you sell? How many did you destroy so that you could make something else? They put, there's a book called Fear in Art. They put 2 groups of students in a pottery class. And at the beginning of the class, at the semester, they divided them in 2. Everyone on one side of the room, you're going to be judged on how many pounds of clay you use. Everyone on the other side of the room, you're going to be graded on your best piece, and we're going to see what comes out at the end. And it's the ones that worked pounds of clay who did the best work, as opposed to the folks that had to focus on one piece that was their best piece.
Yeah.
So I try and work on a lot of work and then destroy a lot of work again, and that's part of my accomplishment. So I look at I do it every year as a goal. I try to do it at the end of the year, and that with that information, what I've accomplished, I can then set my goals for the next year, like, do I want to be in a new gallery? Do I want to try a new medium? Hey, this sold, but this didn't. What do I want to do here? Do I want to try a new size? Does that help?
That's super helpful. So a question I have, and I don't think I've ever asked this question before, when it comes to goal setting and things like that, we get crazy busy during the month of December because we're retail. And I'm a big person wanting to set goals and do that. And so I try and carve out a little time here and there. But what I find is it's usually between like December 25th and, December 31st that I'm sitting down to be like, oh, shoot, I need to start doing goals. When do you find the time, and when do you typically sit down to do your accomplishment list and look at your goals?
I'm not as busy at the end of December. I'm down in Florida. I'm a little bit more relaxed. I am supplying artwork to 2 galleries down there and going to be teaching next year. But I do it when I need it. Usually I do it when I'm in a slump.
Yeah.
Because if I can look back and see what made me feel good, it takes me out of my slump.
Yeah.
So I do them often in July.
Okay.
In fact, it's on my list of things to do this week is to go through my accomplishments because it's light out. I'm in a good place.
Yeah.
Why not write down what I've accomplished? And I take my calendar. I taught this as a workshop. I would say to people, bring your calendar. If you're a visual person, bring photos of your work, what you've done. Take the time to really think about different aspects of your job that you do, and what did I achieve in accounting? What did I achieve in, for you, maybe hiring? What did I achieve in continuing education, all of those different categories of your job, and then look at that and go, wow, that's pretty good. And then you can take that to your boss and say, I keep telling you I want to do this. Now I've proven to you. How much money have I saved the company?
Yeah.
That was always important. How much money do you save the company by your accomplishments?
Yeah. Very cool.
Yeah, if you need me to talk more about that, I can another time.
Awesome. Yeah, I think we need to set up, do an art one, and then we need to do a business podcast next.
There you go.
Business focused. Awesome. Well, tell me about the pieces that you are going to be bringing to the Loft here for the show.
I'm bringing paintings. No, I'm kidding. I'm bringing paintings. This is a small collection. By the way, I need to preface this and tell you that I am represented on island as well at Matsky Fine Art Gallery, and I have my artwork there.
Nice.
And Carla, has been wonderful, and I have artwork there at the same time.
Nice.
But this particular collection of work, I went hiking 2 years ago in July into Mount Baker and Artist Point with a friend. And I used to be a really very avid hiker and in great physical shape. And this one was humbling, but I took a lot of photos. And I used the photos as a way to transport myself back into the mountains, because I haven't had a chance to get in there but once this year. And so what I'm featuring is a series of trees, lakes, waterways, and just vantage points up in the Pacific Northwest that I think are fantastic. They're loose, they're transcending, and I'm really pleased. And then there's one that's going to be slightly different, which is a Adirondacks chair and some flowers, and it reminds me of a place where I can sit and rest to think about what I'm going to paint next.
Nice.
So
very cool.
There'll be they're small pieces and some expansive, and they will be perfect either individually or they'd even make a great set on a wall. So series.
Awesome. Okay. Perfect. All right. Well, we like to end every podcast with some rapid fire questions. So the first one is, what purchase of $100 or less have you enjoyed the most in the last 3 months?
This is really easy. So on the Camino Island studio tour, there's a woman by the name of Sally Chang.
Yeah?
Yep. And Sally's pottery is amazing. And so I picked up 4 plates that I use. They're plates kind of with a little curve to them, so they're a plate bowl.
Yeah.
And I adore them and use them all the time. And thank you, Sally. I love them.
Awesome. All right. Who is the most influential person outside of your family in your life?
It's somebody who's deceased now, but his name was Bob Gerbrocht, and he was my teacher in San Francisco, my art teacher, and he taught me how to measure and take the time to draw it properly before you then paint it. And he was exceptional.
Awesome. All right. This is a fill-in-the-blank question. I know this is weird, but I've always wanted to blank.
I have no idea how to answer that. I laugh. I wear mismatched socks. I have all my life now. And so maybe, I know it's weird, but I've always wanted to wear the same size, same color socks at the same time. Nah, I really don't.
All right. And we talked before the podcast that you didn't have an interesting person you wanted to throw out there. So then the last question is, what piece of advice would you give your 20-year-old self?
Travel. Travel is the best education. I also recommend try being a minority at least once in your life. Go live in a place where you can put all your feelers out, use your sense of smell, sight, sound, hearing. Be humbled and watch and learn, because once you do that, you're going to thrive in this world. But travel.
Yeah.
Great education.
Very cool. Well, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today.
Thank you for having me. I hope it was informative.
It was. I learned so much, not just about art, but about business. And for those listeners, be sure to check out Barbara's show. It's going to be here the 3rd week in July through, I believe, the 2nd or 3rd week in August of 2023. And that's upstairs in the Loft, upstairs in the marketplace. So awesome. And then we'll link to Barbara's website So it's in the show notes. So be sure to check out her stuff there. And I'm sure, do you have socials and stuff like that as well?
Instagram, it's Barb Noonan, and, barb.noonan, and Facebook, it's Barbara Noonan. But mostly I just use my website.
Awesome. Well, we will have all of that linked in the show.
Thank you, Brandon.
Yeah, thank you.
This was fun.
All right. And Islanders, I will talk to you on the next one. Well, a big thank you to Barbara Noonan for joining me on the podcast today, and thank you for listening. And I hope you guys got that. I hope you got more out of this episode than you thought you were going to. And of course, be sure to rate, review, and subscribe to our podcast on your favorite podcast platform. It really does help us be found by other Islanders. With that, I will see you guys